Many people are like alarm clocks. They make a lot of noise but never wake themselves up. Have you ever asked yourself, in a world constantly proclaiming its wakefulness, who is truly dreaming? If everyone is running in the right direction, is anyone stopping to ask where that direction leads? I chose 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, not because it's famous, but because it made me uneasy. A rare feeling in an age where everyone pretends to know exactly what they're doing. Harari doesn't try to comfort you or teach you how to succeed. He does something far more frightening. He pulls out every nail from the beliefs you thought were reinforced concrete. This isn't a book you should asterisk read. It's a book you asterisk must asterisk live with. It doesn't want you to agree, it wants you to confront. If you can close the book and still feel confused, it means you've read it correctly. I recommend you buy a physical copy. Mark the passages that disturb you, dog-ear the pages that silence you, and reread it occasionally, not to understand more, but to remember that some things cannot be understood. If anything in this audio makes you pause for a few seconds, perhaps an idea, a phrase, or just a moment of silence, please consider following this channel. I don't promise easy listening. I only strive not to lie. And sometimes, honesty is the most luxurious thing we can share with each other. Now, let me tell you about this book. We've grown accustomed to viewing technology as a tool, a loyal, obedient, and useful servant. But then, at some point, the tool itself began to develop independent thought, agile reactions, and more importantly, silent manipulation. At that point, who is truly at the wheel? Artificial intelligence is no longer a prediction. It's a silent presence, like breath in a sealed room, but it's increasingly taking over our living space. It's not just changing how we shop, date, or find directions. It's rewriting what we once considered inviolable: emotions, choices, identity. What used to be me is now analyzed by data strings. I am now merely an algorithm, trained long enough. The combination of biotechnology and information technology, as Harari warns, is not just a step forward but a power exchange. For the first time in history, humanity is no longer the most knowledgeable creature about itself. Algorithms know our heart rate when we lie, our eye expressions when we're disappointed, our voting tendencies when we're ambivalent. You think you're choosing, you're chosen to asterisk, think asterisk, you're choosing. Harari isn't talking about the future, he's talking about the present. A present disguised by familiarity. We wake up, grab our phones, scroll through social media, and believe we're updating ourselves on the news. In reality, we are being updated. Every swipe is a measurement, every interaction is a blood sample. And then, when machines can know what we like better than we do, when tech corporations can predict individual behavior more accurately than any psychologist, democracy doesn't die by being destroyed, but by being outmaneuvered. When power lies in the hands of those who control data, voting becomes a meaningless ritual. It's like someone casting a ballot after being monitored for 365 days, and that ballot is processed by the very algorithms that sculpted their desires. In that world, equality doesn't vanish because someone seizes it, but because the ability to upgrade is no longer distributed fairly. Biotechnology promises to enhance the human body, but not for everyone. Can you imagine a future where the children of the elite not only attend the best schools, but also have artificial memories, optimized immune systems, and superior focus thanks to genetic editing? At that point, class struggle will no longer be between rich and poor, but between the upgraded and the unupgraded. And then there's work. The thread that once connected each person to their community, to a sense of purpose, to meaning, also begins to fray. Harari isn't talking about unemployment in the old sense. He's talking about superfluity, a generation of people becoming useless. Not because they are incompetent, but because they no longer fit the logic of the post-industrial market. Machines don't need breaks, don't need health insurance, don't strike. You can call that efficiency, or you can call it systematic obsolescence. More frighteningly, when left behind, they don't just lose income, they lose the feeling that they have a role in the collective story. You can't ask people to sacrifice for the collective when the collective no longer needs them. This is not an economic crisis. It's an existential crisis on a global scale. Harari doesn't offer solutions, nor does he incite revolution. He simply points out the contradiction. While technology races like a cheetah on a runway, politics still shuffles like a coal train. And the gap between these two paces is the danger zone, where humans are left between two worlds: an old world no longer strong enough to protect them, and a new world not yet transparent enough to guarantee fairness. Amidst this surging wave of technology, we are no longer citizens but data, no longer storytellers but behavioral patterns interpreted by algorithms. We gradually lose a privilege once thought innate: the right to understand ourselves. Harari says, and perhaps not without bitterness, free will. The notion that once made us hold our heads high in the modern world is becoming obsolete, like beautiful, idealistic old software no longer compatible with the rapidly changing operating system of reality. When you log into Netflix and see a list of films chosen just for you, don't smile. That's not care, it's classification. You're not understood as a multifaceted human, but as a predictable psychological data string. Easy to sell to, easy to manipulate. You live in a bubble blown by algorithms that have no concept of emotional complexity or the human right to make mistakes. When you start to believe that what you see is the real world, you've fallen into the deepest trap: the illusion of being awake. And if you think this only affects personal life, look at politics. What was once built on ideals and debate is now run by behavioral analytics. Election campaigns are no longer a race of visions, but a game of data. Whoever controls behavioral data controls public emotion. You're not deceived by promises, but programmed by feelings created at just the right moment, hitting your weakest points. When emotions are manipulated so subtly, fundamental values like truth, ethics, or faith are no longer compasses. They become flexible pieces, customized to fit the phone you're holding, your current psychological state, and the crisis you just read about this morning. Harari doesn't tell us to stop believing. He only tells us to doubt what makes us believe too easily. Then comes the cruelest part. Technology not only challenges individuals, but also exposes the slowness, passivity, and sometimes uselessness of state institutions. The education system still teaches things easily found on Google, neglecting the only thing machines can't yet do: teach humans how to ask profound questions. The legal system still thinks linearly, while the world operates nonlinearly, in networks. Policymakers doze off in conferences while the future accelerates outside their windows. You might wonder, so what's the solution? Harari, steadfastly and somewhat heartbreakingly, offers no alternative blueprint. Instead, he urges us to look directly at reality. Perhaps for the first time in human history, we no longer control the pace of the change we ourselves created. And the saddest part is that most of us still believe we are in control. You want to keep your job? Know that it might disappear not because you're bad at it, but because it's no longer necessary. You want to protect your privacy? Understand that it's been given away bit by bit every time you click accept. You want to raise your children to be good people? Understand that good will no longer mean the same thing as when you were young. Everything is being reprogrammed, not by parliamentary resolutions, but by lines of code running silently in the world's operating system. And this is where Harari sends shivers down the reader's spine. When the power of big data is combined with the ability to biologically program, there will be organizations, state or private, with power never before seen in history. They will know you, understand you, adjust you to the point where you can no longer distinguish between yourself and the product of the system. In the past, dictatorships controlled through force. Now, a softer, more invisible but deeper form of control is emerging. Not through violence, but through convenience, not through threats, but through suggestion. No one forces you to do anything. You do it yourself because you think you chose. Harari doesn't scold. He doesn't curse. He narrates and analyzes like someone standing on the sidelines of history, calm enough to hold a pen. But hidden beneath those calm pages is a faint whisper: wake up before it's too late. And perhaps the only way to begin waking up is to dare confront the fear that you are being programmed without even knowing it. The world today doesn't lack data. It only lacks understanding of what that data is saying, and worse, the will to ask the opposite question. Should we know everything? We always think knowledge is power. But Harari forces us to consider a paradoxical possibility. What happens when power reaches a point where it can neutralize ethics? If an algorithm knows someone's tendency to commit a crime in advance, are we allowed to punish them before they do something wrong? Is justice still justice if it is programmed based on cold probabilities? Here, software and philosophy begin to collide, And that is where most technologists remain silent, not because they don't know, but because they don't want to step into the gray zone of ethics. And most politicians either don't understand or pretend not to understand. The consequence is a void, a moral vacuum expanding right at the center of global power. In that vacuum, fundamental questions are left unanswered. If a child can be programmed at birth to have higher intelligence, more stable psychology, healthier physique, are we allowed to refuse that? If not, how much of that child's humanity remains natural and how much is an industrial product? And in the next few generations, by whom will the concept of humanity be redefined? Harari doesn't use exclamation marks, he uses silences. He lets the questions hit like a snap of the fingers against the reader's mind, making us unable to help but repeat in our heads. Could it be that the most frightening thing is not losing control, but not realizing we've lost it? And what he subtly suggests, though deeply haunting, is the prospect of humanity becoming obsolete. Not because robots kill people, but because humans themselves withdraw from the game. Out of exhaustion, out of not understanding the new rules, out of thinking they're still playing the old game. In the world Harari describes, knowledge is no longer something to learn but something to chase. And running forever gets tiring, and when you're tired, you let go. And when you let go, the system takes over. And from then on, what was once human civilization might become just a subchapter in the evolutionary history of non-human intelligent systems. But even so, he doesn't despair. He doesn't push us into a bottomless pit. Instead, he invites us back to a simple thing: consciousness. Not the consciousness crammed in through books, but that unexpected moment when we ask ourselves, who is controlling me right now? If the answer isn't clear, be careful, because perhaps someone or something has been choosing for you for a long time. In the last lines of this section, Harari doesn't advise us to abandon technology. He also doesn't call for a rebellion against the system. He merely suggests, like a wise, old friend, take time to understand yourself before others understand you too well. Because in a world where everything can be calculated, the last thing that keeps us connected to our human nature is the ability to question our very existence. There's a strange truth many people don't want to admit. The more connected the world becomes, the more individuals retreat into their own shells. The internet has made people more accessible to each other than ever before in history. And then everyone goes to find their own group with their own language, their own memes, their own outrage. Harari begins this section not with a declaration, but with a seemingly naive question. In a globalized world, who will protect you if everything collapses? Previously, the answer was the nation, the passport, the army, the tax system, public education, public health, all creating a cocoon to protect you from chaos. But then globalization arrived. Technology has no borders, capital flows like water, information spreads like electricity. Meanwhile, political power remains confined to the local level. Imagine a nation as a boat. If you can steer it, you'll feel safe. But when giant offshore waves, climate change, financial crises, cybercrime hit, that small boat becomes a fragile raft. And the strange thing is, the passengers on the raft cling even tighter to it, shouting, "Close the doors, build walls." Instead of asking, why don't we tie the rafts together? That's instinct. Humans are tribal creatures. When they sense danger, they seek out familiar groups. But that is also a fatal weakness in a global age. Harari leads the reader from political isolation to the paradox of nationalism. On one hand, it's a sedative in a panic. On the other, it's a magnifying glass that amplifies fear. You think immigrants will take your jobs. You think we're being threatened by them. But what you don't see is that your job isn't lost because of some Syrian or African. It's lost because of a line of code in Silicon Valley. Populist politicians are very good at selling illusions. They don't offer solutions to global inequality, they just find an easy scapegoat. Border walls become symbols not just of security, but of the feeling that we still have control. And when that feeling is more important than truth, facts lose their value. At that point, belief becomes a commodity, and skepticism, once an enlightening quality, is labeled as treason. Harari doesn't preach, he exposes. He shows the failure of seemingly stable systems, international organizations, global law, political alliances. He asks, when Facebook manipulates an election in a country, who is responsible? When a tech company causes millions of people to lose their jobs in Africa, who answers to the United Nations? No one, because there is no one. Governments still think they write the laws. But laws are now coded by software engineers, optimized by algorithms that no parliamentarian fully understands. Nation-states are playing a game whose rules are set by others, and sadly, many governments don't try to learn the rules but try to break the board. Brexit is an example. It's not just an exit from the EU, it's a retreat from the idea of cross-border cooperation. But Harari points out a bitter truth. No nation, not even the US, can solve climate change alone, or regulate global financial markets, or prevent a pandemic in a world interconnected like a neural network. You can't cut a wire without twitching. And then there's another aspect, culture. When globalization mixes everything, what defines identity? This question isn't just for conservatives, it's a real question. If your child grows up speaking English with an American accent, eating fast food, watching Netflix, and studying at Stanford University, how much of their homeland remains in them? And if you can't answer, you understand why many people feel panicked. They don't hate globalization because it's bad. They fear it because it erases every trace of what they once belonged to. And that's also when religion steps back onto the stage. Not as a moralist or a savior, but as an umbrella for shelter when the rain of data and technology sends shivers down people's spines. You don't have to believe in God to crave structure. When the world becomes too complex, the simpler the map, the more comforting it is. Harari emphasizes that religion doesn't provide correct answers, but it provides a sense of direction, something daily news and algorithmic recommendations cannot give. But that very comfort is a double-edged sword. Ancient religions were not born to solve current problems. The Bible says nothing about climate change. The Buddha didn't write about digital privacy. The Quran didn't predict the impact of artificial intelligence on the labor market. When religion is called upon to decode the modern world, it often responds with outdated templates, or worse, with dangerously oversimplified formulas. And Harari doesn't criticize belief, he criticizes the use of belief as a political tool. When people say, "Let's return to traditional values," it often means, stop questioning. And in an age where all values need to be updated, clinging to the past is like using a 16th century map to navigate satellites. There's another topic Harari handles like a cracked egg, immigration. He doesn't push the reader to one side right or wrong. He divides the issue into 3 layers, each a societal commitment that has never been clarified. The first layer, accepting immigrants. This is a technical issue. Is there housing? Are there jobs? Is there the capacity to manage them? The second layer, assimilation. Are immigrants willing to learn the language, laws, and customs of the host country? And the final, most demanding layer. Do native citizens truly consider immigrants as fellow countrymen? 3 layers, 3 expectations. But most countries only talk about the first layer, then get disappointed when the latter 2 don't automatically happen. Cultural value differences don't melt in the democratic soup as people imagine. Instead, they settle as sediment. And when there's a crisis, these layers of sediment rise like disturbed lakebed mud, clouding the social picture. With subtlety, Harari points out that immigration isn't just a story about those who arrive, but also about those who are already there. You cannot force native citizens to open their hearts by decree. Trust and acceptance, like love, cannot be coerced. And without true acceptance, the social model will only be a thin, fragile shell. Then he concludes with a chilling paradox. In a globalized world, nationalism will not die. It will be reborn, not as an enemy of globalization, but as a bargaining partner. Nations will say, "We will participate, but on our terms." And when everyone demands to write their own rules, common rules will become something everyone evades, but no one dares to completely break. That's the limbo state Harari calls selective globalization, where everything is connected by Wi-Fi, but trust is encrypted and frozen. It is in this gray picture that he poses a quiet but profound question. Without a compelling global story, can humanity act together? History shows individuals sacrificing for their nation, their religion, their tribe. No one has ever sacrificed for humanity. That is the real challenge of the 21st century. Not how to survive in a global world, but how to love in a world where everything is too distant, invisible, and easily replaceable by a click. And if humanity has never sacrificed for humanity, what could compel us to do so for the first time? Harari doesn't answer directly. He leads the reader through a political labyrinth where faith is commercialized, power is digitized, and fear, not ideals, shapes the future. There's a model called soft power, once lauded as the symbol of the 20th century. Nations didn't need to wield guns, they just needed music, films, education, and popular culture to exert influence. But now, soft power is being replaced by slippery power, where tech companies know everything about you, but you know nothing about them. They don't need to capture you, they just design an ecosystem from which you cannot escape. In that world, old institutions, parliaments, courts, constitutions operate as if time stands still. They argue about education budgets while the new generation learns via YouTube. They debate tax laws while cryptocurrency redefines wealth. They discuss sovereignty while citizens' data is stored on Amazon's servers. These debates become alien not only to the public, but to reality itself. Harari doesn't judge, he observes. And then he flips the coin of globalization. Powerlessness arises not from a lack of means, but from a lack of a shared story. Try to imagine how you could persuade an Indonesian, a German, a Mexican, and a Nigerian to act in unison if they don't believe in the same set of values. No one has ever written a global story compelling enough for everyone to believe. That is a systemic failure. Religions once did that but are now divided. Ideologies once did that but are now burnt out after the Cold War. Now, only technology spreads globally, and ironically, it is technology, with its detached, value-neutral nature, that is trusted more than humanistic dreams. Perhaps that's why nationalism is rising so strongly. It's easy to understand. It gives you a name, a flag, a concrete opponent. It's simple, and in an overly complex world, simplicity always wins. Harari calls this a cognitive surrender. When people no longer have the energy to understand the world, they retreat into the smallest possible shell: tribe, religion, nation. But that's not a solution. It's a postponement of the inevitable, because the real problems like climate change, biological weapons, artificial intelligence don't care about your nationality. The climate doesn't need a visa to enter territory. Data isn't stopped by border walls, pandemics aren't swayed by nationalistic speeches. And then, like a closed circle, Harari returns to the open question: can humanity rewrite a global story powerful enough to compete with nationalism? And if not, will globalization, with all its potential for salvation and destruction, drift pilotless like a giant ship at night, carrying over 7 billion lives, but with no one willing to be captain? At the end of this section, Harari doesn't offer an action plan. He doesn't write a new manifesto. He does something else, humble but essential. He forces us to admit the truth that modern politics is no longer fast enough, deep enough, or real enough to handle the technological and social storms that are brewing. And if we refuse to admit that, the price to pay is not the loss of freedom, but the loss of the ability to recognize that we once had freedom. People often think humanity's greatest fear is death. Harari doesn't think so. He believes what unsettles us more deeply is the inability to understand why a world full of conveniences makes us so anxious. Why, when everything seems to be getting better, medicine advancing, wars decreasing, poverty declining, do so many people seek destruction? This section doesn't try to find answers. It opens another door, passing through darkness to see that light isn't at the end of the tunnel, but sometimes right within that darkness. The first chapter begins with a stark truth. Terrorism isn't as terrifying as we think, but the feeling of terror is its real weapon. Harari doesn't downplay the consequences of terrorist acts, he merely puts them in proper proportion. Compared to traffic accidents, cancer, suicide, or air pollution, terrorism kills very few people. But terrorism is the art of performance. It doesn't need to kill many, just at the right time, in the right place, in front of the right camera lens. And from there, Harari drives straight to the core. Terrorism doesn't win by strength, but by manipulating the victim's imagination. When you start self-censoring, changing your commute, fearing airports, scrutinizing people wearing headscarves, that means you are living in a reality where terrorism, without needing to appear, is present. The more aggressively governments react, the more they help terrorists achieve their goal, making you believe you are under attack. Harari calls this an imaginary threat, not because it's not real, but because it occupies mental space beyond its actual impact, like a psychological virus. Terrorism doesn't spread through blood, but through media. And if the press, social media, and politicians can't control their reactions, they inadvertently become collaborators in the attacker's objective. From terrorism, Harari moves to war, and he emphasizes one thing: we are living in an unprecedented era of peace. Not because humanity has become gentler, but because modern warfare is no longer profitable. Previously, seizing land, resources, and enslaving others was a way to get rich. Today, data, not oil or iron ore, is the most valuable asset, and data cannot be seized by tanks. When technology becomes the center of power, old-style warfare loses its feasibility. Harari points out that China doesn't need to invade Singapore. Simply investing and manipulating information flow is enough. Russia doesn't need to send troops to Kiev. Cyberattacks suffice. Great powers no longer fight with bullets but with trade regulations, supply chain control, and fake news. However, we shouldn't be naive. War doesn't disappear, it transforms. It becomes stealthy, asymmetric, proxy, and often operates outside the jurisdiction of international law. Harari emphasizes that what we call peace is actually a postponement of conflict, not an end. And it is in that postponement that hope or illusion can germinate. But to grasp hope, the first thing needed is humility. Harari dedicates an entire chapter to something modern humanity has almost forgotten. We are not the center of the universe, and certainly not the pinnacle of evolution. The idea that humans are special, superior beings born to dominate is one of the most pernicious illusions ever told and retold. He asks, if humanity disappeared, would the universe care? Would any star change its orbit because we died? And if not, why do we act as if everything revolves around us? Harari doesn't call for self-abasement in a religious moral sense. He calls for epistemic humility, recognizing that we know very little and understand even less. Most of our decisions, from political votes to choosing love, are based on emotion, flawed memories, and crowd influence. If someone confidently declares, "I know what's right," they are probably deluding themselves about their own understanding. When Harari talks about God, he speaks not with the tone of a theologian but of a historian, too accustomed to seeing sacred stories used as political weapons. He doesn't ask, "Does God exist?" a philosophical question long since rotten from being chewed over for centuries. Instead, he asks, what are people doing with God's name? In human hands, God is turned into a brand, affixed to all sorts of spiritual commodities, from laws and wars to identity politics. Belief systems once designed to bind communities now become tools of division. Religion, instead of being a sanctuary for the soul, is used as a sharp knife to cut the world into us and them. If you don't share the same belief, you are a threat. And when fear is politicized, it can kill people without an apology. Religion once promised humanity salvation, but Harari argues that in the modern world, it often does the opposite. It makes people complacent. We have the absolute truth. We are the chosen people. Our values are universal. And from that complacency arises contempt for anyone different. This is not theological criticism. It's a political warning. The world today could be destroyed not because religion is too powerful, but because people use religion as a shield to justify stubbornness. And Harari, an Israeli who has lived through religious conflict every day, understands the cost of politicizing fear in God's name. But he doesn't stop there. He dedicates a chapter to secularism, not as a fashionable trend of Western intellectuals, but as an ideology that needs to be re-understood. Secularism, in Harari's view, is not the denial of belief but the willingness to face uncertainty. It is daring to say, I don't know, and I accept that others don't know either. Here, humility becomes a political value, and that has a strange, liberating power. When you don't think you hold absolute truth, only then can you listen, learn, and change. Secularism doesn't force you to abandon meaning, it forces you to build it yourself. No invisible hand, no voice from on high, just you facing the chaos of the world and your own fragility. Harari writes this not from the position of an elitist or someone cold towards religion. On the contrary, he seems to lament the wasted potential. Instead of helping people live more deeply, love more, understand more, many religions are being led by fear, guilt, and greed. They are no longer torches but slogans hung in a stadium. And so, he emphasizes that hope lies not in returning to traditional values, as some still preach. Hope lies in the ability to renew the human spirit with epistemic humility, with unlimited curiosity, and with the courage to look directly at reality without needing to justify it. If you ask, does this section still leave room for belief? Harari doesn't explicitly say, but you can feel that the belief he champions is one that doesn't need to be backed by threats, doesn't need to be barricaded by hatred. It is a belief as soft as moist earth underfoot, not soaring but enduring. This is not an easy section to read. It forces one to question oneself. What do you believe in? Why do you believe it? And if you were born elsewhere in a different culture, would you still believe it? If the answer makes you uneasy, Harari suggests you are beginning to step into the light, the zone of hope. And then, after all the darkness, terrorism, war, religious complacency, inflated nationalism, distorted beliefs, Harari doesn't end this section with a slammed door. He leaves it ajar, just enough for the reader to know there is still a way out, but it's not external. It's not in an arsenal, not in a data bank, not in the promise of a supreme being. It lies in how humans interpret themselves. We once believed that history had a direction, that from savagery humanity would progress towards enlightenment. From slavery to freedom, from superstition to science, from backwardness to modernity. But if you look closer, as Harari suggests, history isn't necessarily a road. It's a network, and each step forward is a fork in the path. We're not moving towards the light, but groping through a maze of our own making. And as everyone who has ever gotten lost knows, to find the way out, the first thing to do is stop. Stop to think sounds simple, but in this age of noise, it's a revolutionary act. When everyone is talking, the one who knows how to be silent is the most remarkable. When everyone rushes to speak out, the one who knows how to ask questions is the one who truly hears something. Harari doesn't paint a rosy future. He doesn't believe in spiritual panaceas, nor does he advocate for pessimism. What he builds is a framework of understanding not manipulated by fear or blind hope. Because he knows that hope is not the blind belief that everything will turn out well. True hope is the ability to recognize that things can turn out badly, and we still choose to act. That is the kind of hope that makes a person stand up to vote, even knowing their ballot might not change anything. It makes a scientist continue research, even if no one invests. It makes someone write a book about human ethics in the age of algorithms, even knowing they cannot stop data corporations. Hope, according to Harari, doesn't lie in the outcome, it lies in the action. It lies in our choice to live as if we have an influence, as if our consciousness is not useless, even though the system, many times larger than us, is trying to do the opposite. And that is the strongest resistance, refusing to be turned into data. If there's one thing this section wants to say, and says very softly, like a whisper, it's that humans have never truly understood who they are. But perhaps what makes human dignity is not understanding, but the continuous effort to understand. It is in that effort, in the space where humility and curiosity intersect, that we can find the only thing left when all theories, all ideologies, all models fail: compassion. Harari doesn't preach about love. He doesn't use soft language, but you can feel that the entire section, from terrorism to war, from faith to awakening, points towards a quiet center. How can humans still retain their humanity in a world that no longer believes in any absolute truth? And if a miracle exists, it is not an intervention from above, but the moment a person stops and asks, "How am I living? Am I truly living?" And that question, when asked with absolute honesty, is the seed of hope amidst a forest of despair. In the modern world, truth no longer dies by being hidden, it dies by being drowned amidst different versions of itself. Harari opens this section not with a lament about fake news or a celebration of independent media, but with a chilling assertion. In an era of information overload, ignorance is not an accident, it is a choice. He doesn't criticize people for not knowing, he points out how the system is designed to make people not need to know. Look around. Information is more abundant than ever, but who has the patience to verify, to read deeply, to go against the trend? Humans are no longer imprisoned in ideological cells, but swept away in a flood of data, where truth floats among the screams of thousands of opinions, millions of clicks. Harari calls this the era of deliberate disorientation, where powers don't try to control information, but try to make you incapable of distinguishing what matters. He writes, "If you can keep people busy arguing about meaningless things, you won't need to hide the important things. Politicians don't need to lie, they just need to tell more captivating stories and repeat them often enough. In the attention economy, whoever captures your mind wins. No need to be right, just stand out. Truth becomes a product competing with emotions, with entertainment, with anger. And often, it loses because truth is rarely stimulating. It requires time, verification, patience. While falsehood only needs a shocking headline. Harari recounts that in the past, knowledge was power. Churches, monarchies, academies all revolved around accumulating and protecting knowledge. But in the 21st century, knowledge is no longer rare. It has become universal, easily accessible, and therefore undervalued. People no longer fear a lack of information, they fear having to filter it. And that is where truth loses its worth. But there's something more dangerous. When people lose faith in truth, they lose the ability to believe in anything. Skepticism, once an enlightened virtue, is pushed to an extreme, becoming boundless nihilism. Anything can be called fake news, science, law, witnesses, history. All can be dismissed with a shrug. Who knows what's real anymore? And this is where Harari forces us to confront the paradox. You cannot have democracy if you don't have a common factual foundation. You can disagree on opinions, but if you live in one world and the person next to you lives in another, debate is meaningless. It's like two chess players, each following different rules, yet both believing they are winning. Harari doesn't romanticize the past. He admits that humans have always lived with illusions. Every civilization has built stories of divine ancestors, sacred missions, superior peoples. But he clearly distinguishes between myths that build and lies that destroy. There are beliefs that help communities look forward together, and there are beliefs that shut doors, burn books, and erect barriers. Truth, according to Harari, is not a mountain we can stand upon. It is a continuous journey of correction. Science is not true because it is absolute, but because it always leaves open the possibility of being wrong. That is the distinction between knowledge and dogma. One asks, "What if I'm wrong?" The other declares, "I cannot be wrong." And perhaps the most ironic thing is that technology itself, once seen as the liberator of truth, is becoming the most fertile ground for illusions to flourish. When information is compressed into memes, complexity is replaced by emotional language, and every argument can be made to look suspicious with a few visual effects. Truth is no longer a matter of logic. It becomes a marketing competition. Harari offers a comparison that couldn't be more bitter. If in the past humans were led by fortune tellers and priests, today they are led by algorithms. The commonality is that neither needs you to understand, only to believe. But the difference is that a fortune teller cannot follow you 24/7, cannot know you're distressed at 2 a.m., cannot predict which ad you'll click. An algorithm can. And that makes ignorance today no longer a lack of knowledge, but the result of being surrounded by things that make you think you understand. It is precisely for this reason that Harari speaks of justice not as a legal principle, but as a battle of perspectives. In the post-truth era, justice is no longer defined by rights or laws, it is defined by emotion. What feels right is considered right, and that makes society more prone to division than ever before, not because people disagree, but because they live in entirely different moral worlds. One person believes justice is heavily taxing the rich. Another believes justice is letting everyone keep what they earn. One person believes justice is protecting the rights of the fetus. Another believes justice is protecting the mother's right to choose. The problem is not right or wrong, but that both sides no longer share a common moral language for debate. Harari doesn't take sides. He simply does one thing, asks each person to question themselves. What values are you relying on for your conclusions? Where do those values come from? Are they still relevant in the current context? And if you've never asked those questions, perhaps you're repeating an old program, not because you believe, but because you've never had a chance to doubt. It is here that the concept of post-truth becomes a double-edged sword, not because it kills truth, but because it devalues truth as a common standard. If everyone has their own truth, then no one has to be accountable for what they believe anymore. You believe because you want to, you filter with emotion, you discard with intuition. And when truth becomes a fashionable choice, the most dangerous people are those who speak most captivatingly. Harari emphasizes that in this era, the survival of democratic societies depends not on kindness, but on the ability to protect analytical institutions. Independent newsrooms, research universities, nonpartisan court-saw places dedicated to slowing down the flow of information so it's not swallowed by the storm of emotions. But the heartbreaking truth is that these very institutions are losing credibility. Not because they do wrong, but because they are slow. And in an age where patience is a luxury, Anyone who slows us down is seen as an obstacle. In that picture, Harari dedicates a chapter to science fiction, not as a pastime but as a mirror. He argues that many people understand the world not through textbooks but through comics, movies, video games. And precisely because of this, fictional stories become the place where the collective subconscious is shaped. If you grow up with images of robots rebelling, you will be suspicious of artificial intelligence. If you are haunted by images of a destroyed Earth, you will see technology as an enemy. Scientists can provide facts, but it is the storytellers who shape how we feel about those facts. And so, Harari says, don't underestimate popular culture. See it as the place where humans are negotiating their future, often unconsciously. And it is in these final pages of this section that Harari returns to something seemingly too simple to discuss. Who is the storyteller, and who has the power to make millions believe a certain story, regardless of whether it's true? When journalism withdraws from war zones due to lack of budget, when science is no longer funded because it's deemed useless, when libraries become event centers, the void for defining truth is handed over to the best storytellers, not researchers, but influencers, not scholars, but YouTube scriptwriters. Truth doesn't die by being stifled, it dies by competing with better stories. Harari is not pessimistic, but he also doesn't pretend to hope. He simply points out that to protect truth in this age, you don't just need knowledge, you also need to learn how to tell stories. If you want people to believe science, you have to make science as moving as a movie. If you want people to understand justice, you must have enough language to make them feel included. Otherwise, your enemy is not the liar, but the one who tells a better story. There's a passage in this section where Harari writes as if speaking personally to each reader, be careful with your own memories. He's not talking about memories manipulated by others, but manipulated by the very stories you've chosen to live within. If you believe you are always right, that your side is always good, that your beliefs are self-evident, then you might be living in a fairy tale constructed by your own fears. And that, more than any other enemy, is the greatest threat to truth. Not fake news, not deepfakes, not social media, but the fact that you no longer ask yourself what you believe and why. Harari ends this section with a beautiful and terrifying paradox. To protect truth, you must not worship it like a god. You must always doubt it, not to deny it, but to keep it alive, flexible, open to continuous dialogue with a changing reality. Truth does not need to be framed. It needs to be kept flexible, like a mental muscle. The more it's used, the stronger it becomes, the more it's questioned, the more trustworthy it is. And if one day you stop asking questions, it means you have handed your truth over to someone else. And that is what Harari fears most, a world where everyone thinks they know enough. After all this data, power, nationalism, religion, technology, post-truth, after each layer of waves washing away the so-called stable foundations, Harari poses a question that is neither topical nor academic, but profoundly human. How can an ordinary individual survive in this era? The final section doesn't begin with a forecast or a future model. It begins with a direct look at education, not the system, but its essence. Harari doesn't ask what schools teach. He asks if anyone is teaching people how to adapt. When every job can be replaced by machines, when professions disappear after a software update, when today's skills can be obsolete within 3 years, the only thing that remains valuable is not specific knowledge, but the ability to relearn asterisk. But schools don't teach you to relearn. They teach you to memorize, and memorization, in the age of Google and Wikipedia, is an increasingly worthless skill. Harari points out a paradox. Modern education was born in the industrial age to produce obedient, punctual workers who could repeat processes. But the 21st century needs the opposite, people who are self-directed, flexible, and capable of adjusting themselves. Old education taught us how to fit into the system. The future demands that we know how to dismantle that very system. And then he goes further. He doesn't just talk about learning literacy or skills, but about learning to understand oneself. You can have a PhD but still be manipulated by a fake news story. You can be an AI engineer but still be swayed by a YouTube algorithm. You can be an economist but not know why you get angry when you see an immigrant enter the bakery near your home. Without an understanding of your own mind, all knowledge becomes a self-destructive weapon. That's why Harari shifts from education to meaning. When all major belief systems are cracking, When collective stories like religion, nation, and empire begin to lose their persuasive power, modern humans are left alone with the question, what am I living for? He doesn't offer an answer-no life mission, no ultimate purpose. Instead, he exposes a truth that most self-help books avoid. Meaning is not something to be found pre-made. It is something created every day, every decision, every action. You don't find your life's purpose in a meditation retreat or a workshop. You build it from choosing forgiveness instead of revenge, from adopting a stray dog, caring for a sick person, staying silent when everyone else is shouting. There is no prophet to tell you. There is only you in every small moment choosing what to do with your life. And it is at the intersection of uncertainty and proactivity that Harari arrives at the least expected place: meditation. The final chapter, after hundreds of pages on politics, technology, religion, and war, is an invitation to silence. Not silence to escape, but silence to listen to the noise in your head, to emotions rising and falling like waves, to what story you are telling yourself. Harari recounts that he meditates every day, not for inner peace but to observe, to clearly see thoughts, emotions, desires. All are biological phenomena, and like clouds in the sky, they come and go. The important thing is not to control them, but to realize that you are not them. In these days when social media is so noisy that every voice blends together, Harari suggests that the most urgent thing is not to speak your voice, but to realize whose voice is speaking in your head. Is it truly you, or is it the echo of parents, teachers, tradition, advertisements, or fears accumulated from countless shocking headlines? He doesn't use mystical language when talking about meditation, no deities, no enlightenment as an ultimate reward, just a simple act repeated every day. Sitting down, closing your eyes, observing your breath. And in that simplicity, a universe of habits, prejudices, and illusions begins to surface from the waters of consciousness. Harari says, "When I meditate, I see my mind as a drunken monkey, jumping from one idea to another for no reason." And that is the truth about most of us. We think we are thinking, but we are actually being swept along by an uncontrollable stream of notions. We think we have free will, but most of our decisions are shaped by unconscious psychological mechanisms, trained from childhood and nurtured by the system. In this context, resilience is no longer the ability to withstand with reason or willpower. It is the ability to recognize what is happening within us without being carried away by it. A fear is just a fear if we see it like a cloud, but it becomes destiny if we believe we are that storm. This is not rebranded Eastern philosophy. This is a way to survive in an era where human identity itself is being reprogrammed bit by bit. And Harari doesn't sanctify meditation. He emphasizes that meditation, like education, science, and art, is a tool. If used correctly, it helps us see more clearly, react less, and live more actively. But if used as a mask of peace, it can also become a spiritual anesthetic, lulling us into procrastination, avoidance, and paralysis. This is the crux of the final section. Resilience is not immobility, it is flexibility. It is the ability to change without losing oneself. It is learning to stand in the wind, not breaking, not hiding, and not trying to brace oneself to become invincible. Harari doesn't offer 10 steps to living resiliently. He merely paints a picture where everyone is challenged, not by grand tragedies, but by continuous disruption, distraction, disorientation, loss of meaning. The mental illnesses of the 21st century don't scream like cancer or bombs. They bleed silently, seeping through screens, through dreams shrunk into metrics of delight, follow, and like. And in that world, Harari makes a peculiar suggestion. Take time each day to do nothing at all, no studying, no working, no trying to understand, just sitting there with yourself. Perhaps what you'll see is a mess. That's good. It means you've begun to see the true floor of your mind after the polished veneer has chipped away from exhaustion. And it is from that point that true resilience begins, not from strength, but from understanding. When you listen to yourself, you can also hear the part of the world you no longer control. The strange thing is that precisely in the moment you give up the effort to control the world, you begin to see more clearly what you truly can do. Harari doesn't encourage giving up. He merely points out that control is an illusion, while awareness is an ability. In an increasingly chaotic world, people often turn to grand theories, things that can explain everything. Some believe religion will save humanity, others bet on artificial intelligence, some on nationalism, some on futurism. But Harari, though perhaps better than most of us at constructing grand narratives, chooses a small action, observing his breath. He emphasizes that nothing is more dangerous than a human who thinks they understand everything. Because then they will do anything to prove the world operates according to their mold. History is full of such people. From popes to dictators, from reformers to revolutionaries, they thought they held the truth and were ready to burn the whole world to preserve it. And Harari chooses the opposite attitude. He rejects certainty, not to live sluggishly, but to live mindfully. He doesn't call for global change. He doesn't offer a new political manifesto. He only suggests, before you intend to fix the world, try to observe how you are reacting to the world. This is a strange, almost paradoxical invitation in an era of the macro, live micro. While everything pushes you to update, stop to distinguish what is truly necessary to know. When people rush to speak out, learn to be silent to hear if you still have your own voice. Resilience, according to Harari, is not about building walls, nor about accelerating. It lies in the ability not to fall into collective panic. Among 7 people running in one direction, you may not need to run with them, not because you know the way, but because you are not afraid to get lost. And that, if it has a beautiful name, can be called freedom. Harari ends the book not with a formula for living, not with a utopian vision, but with a very mundane choice. Look deeply within yourself before you intend to change the world. Because perhaps, just perhaps, it is in that quiet, fragile, and honest land that you will find what no revolution can bring. A peace that needs no proof. Thank you for joining me to the very last page of a book that's not easy to read, and certainly not easy to digest. 21 Lessons for the 21st Century offers no answers, nor does it promise healing. It's simply a straight, undistorted mirror for you and me to see more clearly the cracks in the world we call real. If you felt angry somewhere during the listening, that's a sign you're alive. If you felt confused, unsettled, it's because you're being honest. And if you felt silent, not out of peace but out of having no words left, then perhaps this book has done exactly what it should. I don't want you to rate this book with stars or scores. I want you to react perhaps with a sentence, a perspective, an agreement or disagreement right down to your corso that this book doesn't end here, but begins a conversation that we, living in the whirlwind of the 21st century, truly need. If you have a book that you couldn't put down, couldn't stop thinking about while walking down the street, turning off the lights to sleep, or when you asked yourself who you are in this age, please suggest it to me. I want to experience that book with you, to crawl into the author's mind, peel back the layers, and see what deeper truth might be hidden within. I don't promise to make you feel comfortable in the next episodes. I only promise not to pretend. And perhaps in an age where pretense reigns, such a promise is enough to begin. Thank you, and see you again.